Okay, so let's talk about the latest stuff that I've been working on. First, I'll actually start by saying that I've switched from Loom to trying out CleanShot, which was recommended by a number of folks. Loom just wasn't doing it for me and had more annoyances than benefits. So, giving CleanShot a shot, and then we'll see how this goes. Also, continuing my whole talking to a specific person to make this a little bit easier. Um, Dave Goddard said awesome. So that's enough for me to continue doing this and having the motivation to continue to record these videos about my cushion progress. I've done a lot of work since the last video, which I think I got up to the date picker or date input. Now I have like a quantity input, currency input, a lot of variations there, as well as digging into line items. And line items sort of have these dependencies or prerequisites of like a quantity input or a currency input for the rates. So it's sort of like building the small building blocks that will allow me to finish the bigger building blocks. So yeah, first was the quantity input. Again, it extends my original input component. So that's my base. And from here, I'm essentially allowing you to um, enter any quantity. And like a regular integer is totally valid. A float or decimal is totally valid. But then you can also get into things like time-based values. So in Cushion, there's a concept of time tracking. You can import your time tracking data into the invoice, so it might appear in a format like this. So it's like hours and minutes. You can even throw in, seconds as well if you want to. And then there's a secondary format for time, which is like this. So a typical clock style. Um, so the way that I do this is by using regular expressions to sort of match or parse the input that you have. So I'll actually go into the input component. This is pretty simple, honestly. Like this is all the code in the view itself. All I do is parse the quantity whenever you change it, and then I throw the input value in there as well. So parsing is where all the heavy lifting is done. Um, and that has a single function that you like figure out which one of these it is. Oh, also, I noticed that I parse percent as well. So if you want to do like 50%, it computes that correctly to 0.5. Um, so yeah, it goes through the motions of figuring out, is it a percent, is it a time, is it just a regular integer, and then it handles not a number or null values and all that. This comes in handy down here for like line items where you might say, okay, multiply this value by this quantity, but then you get into like the time-based aspect and it just works, or like percentage stuff and it just works. I feel like this is going to be handy for any sort of discount that you might apply. Or let's say there's like an additional tax that you have to append to your existing line items. Or you can just leave it blank and it'll default to one just behind the scenes. So that was a big, like, not a big component itself, but it's a fun one. It's like writing all these little parsers is fun for me. I like just going through and writing unit tests, making them pass. It's a nice sort of exercise when you're just wanting to code but not work on something super heavy. And then the next one was the currency input. So here you can type in an amount and it does not format it as you go. So like you could just write it as this. It doesn't try to update the input as you're going and might, jitter or confuse you or try to format and actually create some friction. So I keep the hands off at that point, and then once you blur the input, that's when it actually formats everything. And this is actually using a library that I love called currency.js. Currency.js. Yeah, so it's this one. Um, Super handy. I actually use it for handling big decimals. So I wrote a little function that wraps currency so that I can add subtract, divide, all that kind of stuff without resulting in floating point issues. If you're not familiar with that, Google it. It's the not fun part of programming that you have to deal with. So um, yeah, the currency input itself, though, um, I handle it by making sure that you can update the input value and reformat the currency, but only if the input is not in focus. So again, keeping the view pretty lightweight. There's not too much to test here, just going through the motions of like handling input and parsing the currency itself. And then most of the heavy lifting is done on the format or the utility for that. I do a lot of checks around things that are undefined, things that are null. If there's any empty strings or not a number in there, I want to make sure that I catch that so it's not like a invalid input that you get and then you have to, it's a headache. I just end up defaulting to null if anything's wrong. And then for parsing currency, luckily currency itself, like the library, if you wrap the amount that's valid, you just have to call dot value and it gives you the correct floating decimal number for that. So it works out pretty well. Super easy. It's just, a dozen lines of code. Um, for this, I ended up having a lot of variations, as I mentioned, like justifying right. Um, what's this one? I don't know, just handling like placeholders, um, being able to bold the text, the font weight, so that we can have subtotals over here. And then I am actually currently using an input here that's read only for the actual total of the line items, but I'll probably change it up. I don't like the concept of using an input behind the scenes there. I'd rather just have something that's like a actual div that's just the text itself. But lastly is the line items here. This is somewhat of a doozy that I'm just like chipping away at little by little. At first, when you're just starting from scratch, it feels very overwhelming. But as I'm going, um, just going through the list of things that I'm making in Linear of all the tasks and subtasks and things around this. I have like a line item component, went through the motions of like a checklist of little like columns that I need, but then now I'm starting to add sub issues around things like tax fields or project fields or multi-line descriptions. I think I might actually have that already. So like yeah, you can like create multi-line descriptions just as I mentioned. And then what's the other one? Line item table, adding and removing lines. So that's one I just finished, where in the current cushion, you can just have this empty line here, and then as soon as you start typing, it creates another empty line, and it sort of adds this one to your existing model. So the way that I do that, this is not, I don't think I've tested this yet, so it's still work in progress code, as you can see with the console logs. I'm currently I keep a reference to the empty line item. So that's just nulled out values for description, rate, quantity, original quantity. Original quantity is the actual string of the input. Let's say it's, 1H30M for time. And then the quantity is actually the parsed value in the back end. So that'll be like 1.5 for that value. This is considered empty, so I actually do a watch on the empty line, and if any of these values are different, I just push that to the line items array, and then I replace the empty line item with a new empty line item. Um, that actually works well. Like the difference here is that now when I have something here, no matter what field I enter, then it will create a new one. In the existing cushion, I think it only works on the description field. So here I can say like, okay, let's say I'm just adding a quantity right there, creates a new line. Say I'm only adding a rate, that works the same. I still need to get to the point where I can remove line items. That's no big deal, just adding a button. And then next from there will be reordering the line items as well. That's one thing that the current cushion does not have. It's been 10 years, still haven't added it, but occasionally gets requested, and it feels like a sort of like, duh, this should have this feature. But it's been a while. I'll get to it. I'm looking forward to it. But the code in there right now is so old that I'd rather rewrite all this stuff, get it all in tip-top shape, and then start to add these extra features. Um, yeah, I think that's about it. Next, I'll dig into, gosh, finishing up line items. And then I think I might actually be close to being done with the MVP. Um, yeah, so I'm trying to keep it pretty light, and I think I'll just get into like composing these together on the actual layout. And that'll be a big step because it's one step closer to deploying this, getting it in production, letting people kick the tires on this current, like slowly rolled out version where it doesn't have everything that's in parity to um, the current live version of Cushion. There's still taxes, multiple taxes. There's still projects per line item, um, creating clients and projects within the invoice form. There's a lot. So, you know, drawing a line in the sand of what I want to get out there live, like the MVP of it, and then from there I'll add little by little and get people's feedback and go through cycles with it. But yeah, thanks for listening.